All right, guys, I'm just gonna go ahead and get started. Um, so, just for those who don't know, my name is Tyedric Hill. From the States. Originally, I was born in Dallas, Texas. I lived there for 18 years. When I turned 18 and I graduated from high school, I moved to Columbus, Ohio, and I've been living in Columbus, Ohio ever since. I discovered jazz dancing and Lindy Hop. Well, first, actually, I went dancing. I went to a dance in, I believe, 2016 or 2015, but I just went to one dance in my city, and it was something that people in my church just did for fun. Like, we went one time. And then when I started dancing, I started doing Lindy Hop in 2017. And that was because I wanted to impress a girl. And basically, we had been on a date, and she had told me that she liked dancing. So I thought that I would impress her with how much I listen. And I went and I researched where we could go swing dancing, and I happened to find, we went out on a night that they had a live band. I got really lucky. And I remember watching the floor, trying to figure out what everybody was doing. They had a little 30-minute lesson before the dance began, where they taught us, tuck turn and change places or a side pass. And so they taught us that, but I was kind of watching the other dancers on the floor, and I kept on seeing them like hold each other and go around in a circle. So I was doing my best job to try to copy what I saw. This is how I learned how to dance to begin with. And I remember it was Benny's Bugle. The song is like, and I remember kind of going around, and I was taking, and I didn't know what I was doing, so we were really just kind of running around each other. But I remember hearing that right as I was looking at my date. We were kind of looking at each other, and then we just sort of started laughing. And that's when I kind of got hooked there, because I realized to myself that I was having fun. And I couldn't really explain why. It just felt very childish and innocent and goofy. It just made me feel very giddy. So I just kept on coming and coming and coming. Eventually, I stopped dating that girl. I kept on dancing. So yeah, that's how I got into Lindy Hop. I started dancing, moving my body, and just dancing I've been doing since I was 7. And that came in the context of church. My mother brought me out, and she studied dancing, and she sung in the choir. And so I'm the oldest of 10 children, and we grew up in a really poor environment, and my mom wanted to keep us from bad influences. So we followed her wherever she went. So she was singing and dancing in church. So eventually we had to start singing and dancing in church. So for me, I was 7. My little brother was 5. My other little brother was 3 when we first started dancing and performing. And it's been a combination of influences ever since then. So we did a lot of liturgical dancing, which is a style that black people do in churches. And then we did modern dancing, which I'm talking about Pearl Primus, Catherine Dunham. Like, we did a lot of modern stuff, and we did a lot of miming back then. And then when I was 11 or 12, we started going to take lessons at the local African American Cultural Center. And for about 4 or 5 years, we did capoeira as well. So that's a Brazilian dance style, and so I was also doing that as a boy. And at that time, I also got really into, I saw Step Up for the first time and thought b-boying was the coolest shit ever. So YouTube was a thing, so I started looking up tutorials about how to do, basics, turtle freeze, 6-step, whatever have you. So baby freeze, these things were the things that I was practicing when I was like 12 and 13 in my living room, trying to show my brothers. We were trying to figure it out together. And so, yeah, my history with dance has been really long and diverse. Eventually, I ran my own dance crew. I had my own little thing when I was 16. And we would do, like, hip-hop, choreography, and animation. Animation was really popular back then in 2012, 2013. It was like the dubstep era. Everybody was posting these cool videos of them dancing like robots to dubstep. And, yeah, so I was really into that. And then I took a break from dancing. I got really into playing and writing music, and Lindy Hop was actually my gateway back into moving my body. So that's a bit about me and my history with the dance. I thought for this talk, what we could do is I could just maybe go over a brief history of jazz dance as it starts, and then I thought maybe we could from a historical lens, maybe discuss why it is that people dance in the first place. And I could take questions. In that way, we could open it up and it could be broad. Malik and Dennis were kind of, they were telling me that people here in Turkey were very curious about just the cultural experience of a black person in America, and I figured I could open myself up to questions if people had any, or whatever have you. It's very informal, I don't have like a teacher's plan here. I just want to keep it nice and relaxed and chill. So jazz dancing, man. If anybody wants, there's a couple books that I really like to read. This book is one of them. Jumpin, it's by Catherine Hazard Gordon. It's important to know that a lot of jazz history books where dance is concerned, you can make criticisms of them. And a lot of, don't read a book and assume that this one book is law, is what I want to say. It's important when you're studying the history of dance and dance history to take a plethora of sources from different areas to kind of consolidate an opinion. Where the most people agree, there's probably a truth. Does it make sense? And so I know some people have some criticisms of Jumpin. I don't think it's a perfect source, but I do like it because I think it gives us little details that other books don't really touch on. Jazz dance doesn't start in the Savoy Ballroom. Jazz dancing doesn't even really start for me in New Orleans, where people say it's the birthplace of jazz. Jazz dancing to me starts on plantations. The reason why I think this is due to a musician, and of course now my brain is blanking, plays the piano, Marie, oh my gosh. Why am I blanking now? Why am I blanking now? Mary, hang on. Jazz. Sorry. Mary Lou Williams, thank God. My brain, Mary Lou Williams, if you go to her album, A Grand Night for Swinging, the last track in that album is an interview that she gives. And in that interview, she defines jazz history in 4 different eras, okay? The reason why I think that Mary Lou Williams is a credible source to trust for jazz history is that she learned from the best. So she started playing music in the 1910s, I think 1905. She was a child prodigy. So at 3 or 4 or 5, I think it was 4 or 5, the story goes her mom, who was also a musician, heard her piano ringing in the living room, and there's little Mary kind of typing out or playing out a melody that she had heard her mom play before. She gets really excited. She goes out. She talks to all the neighbors. Come look at my daughter. Come look at my daughter. She's doing this crazy thing. And so she was a childhood prodigy. Mary Lou Williams was playing with the Andy Kirk Big Band in Kansas City. She was playing with them by the time she was 15 or 16. You guys got to stop and think about this, because this is the early 20th century, right? She's black, and she's a woman in a male-dominated industry. And she's so good that as a teenager, she's playing in professional bands. Like, she worked through 2 layers of discrimination. She's undeniable. Andy Kirk is a huge influence. Kansas City has a huge role to play in the formation, especially of big band and roll and swing sounds. So she was kind of right there in the heartbeat of the big band movement as it was coming up. And then she played with the best. So she played with Count Basie, she played with Quincy Jones, she played with Duke Ellington, and then she taught the best. So guys like Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, these guys, Thelonious Monk, they would go to her house and she would teach them jazz. Does it make sense? So she taught the best, she played with the best, and she learned at a time when the sound was really raw. And she was a childhood prodigy. I think that this makes her very credible. She breaks jazz history into 4 eras, right? She's got the Negro spiritual, ragtime, Kansas City swing, and then the bop era, or bebop. Does it make sense? So the Negro spiritual is that area in the plantations, or that era that goes, this is slavery times, right? Ragtime is Reconstruction. We're going after slavery. We can also maybe, I think she incorporates Dixieland, ragtime, into the New Orleans and traditional jazz sound. That groove is more like, you know, we don't have so much syncopation until the late 20s, early 30s. And I think this is the era where she would maybe define Kansas City swing or big band swing kind of pops off. So we see 4 different eras. The thing is, if we include the Negro spiritual, the first plantation in America, we say legally, was in 1619. 1619 is the first plantation in America. So that's several hundred years of music until you get to the 1920s, 1910s, or whatever, right? I think that already we get a sense of jazz not being something that's boxed into an era of a few decades, but when we really zoom out to see jazz proper, it's something that maybe is a little bit more fluid and has roots, very strong and intentional roots that dig into our present and dig really far into the past. Does that make sense? If Mary Lou Williams is to be trusted, but we don't have to just trust Mary Lou Williams, because also most dance historians would credit what we do to start with certain traditions that slaves did on the plantations. The 2 things that I'm talking about are cakewalk and ring shout, right? So cakewalk competitions, I think we all might know what that is, right? The folks are kicking up high, they're pretending to make fun of the plantation masters or whatever. They do that for a cake. Ring shout is really, really, really cool. I learned more and more about ring shout as I research it. Tap dancers, my tap dance instructors would describe ring shout as them standing in a circle and like everybody, different people have different responsibilities with different rhythms. And over time, they create a cacophony of they have one beautiful orchestrated sound that comes from many different rhythms that are happening together, right? And slaves would make this song together. That's one side of the ring shout that I've heard. Another side of the ring shout, and this is something that I really connect to, is that it had a religious function, right? And I like this book, Jumpin. Catherine Hazard Gordon actually writes about ring shout. I have to find the... Is it this one? Nope. Give me 1 second. I lost the page, but essentially she writes about it, and what she says is, she talks about a plantation master. He's like watching his slaves, and 3 or 4 of them start clapping out a rhythm, and everybody else just starts dancing and moving in a circle. That's it. And the way that they describe the dancing is that the people are like bending over a lot, and they're stomping the floor. Now in church, when folks shout, like my grandma, my aunties, I have images. I would say that a shout is this, right? So you get this idea of a bunch of people making a rhythm. The rhythm is very visceral. It connects them to the ground, and it travels up through the body, and they share that with each other as they move in a circle. Does that make sense? And so this is the idea. It's rhythm in a community, okay? It's shared in a circle, and we know that it has some kind of spiritual purpose. I don't think the historians were clear to say that it wasn't only ceremonial and religious, but it could be religious, and it could be spiritual. And to be truthful, I think even if it wasn't religious in a sense of deity, I think that it may have been, you could say, religious still, a religious experience in a sense of just humanity, in that like there are these people and they're shoved together and they have very little in common. African tribes, before, nobody had the term black before the advent of slavery. Everybody had their own tribes or whatever. But Africans didn't call themselves black. They were Susu, they were from the kingdom of Dahomey, you know what I mean? They had tribes, they had their own cultural markers that they would identify by, not necessarily by the color of their skin. So they didn't have language in common, really. They didn't have family or sociality in common, really, and slave masters didn't care about just preserving family lineages or anything like that. So they got ripped from everything that was familiar and put in a very interesting situation where you're with people that look like you and they kind of have similar cultural impulses to you as it comes to rhythm, but they don't actually have you might not have language in common. You might not have family or friend in common. They might be a total stranger. They might be from 1,000 miles that way. Does that make sense? Even if they were 50 miles that way, we're talking about a time when 50 miles might as well have been the other side of the world. Does that make sense? So what are people to do, and how do they get by? I think this is where the reason about the compulsion to dance becomes really significant. Because why would you dance if you're a slave? What's the value of song and dance if you're put in this terrible situation where, you don't have family, you don't know anyone, you can't really speak to people? Why would you sing and why would you dance? And I think that there has to be some way to process pain there. That when those slaves are moving around in the ring shout, there's something that they're doing there that's healing, and that's why they keep doing it. Does it make sense? So yeah, we start off with the ring shout and the cakewalk, and these things are the things that are actually the beginning of jazz dancing, because rhythm is beginning to be embodied and shared. Two other things to think about: a discipline called pattern juba, J-U-B-A. And this is, ham bone is another word for it. But this is, certain slaves in communities would put the rhythm in their bodies in really cool ways. I can't really do it or demonstrate, but if you looked up pattern juba or ham bone is H-A-M-B-O-N-E as one word. If you looked it up, there's all kinds of cool examples of people who have preserved that tradition as well. And they have these really cool syncopated rhythms that they can do, just smacking their hands on their knees and on their chest all over their body, right? How that relates to jazz. It's rhythm in the body. Eventually, after the Civil War, in the Reconstruction era, slaves leave plantations, they leave their slave quarters, and now they're interacting more with other communities of people, right? One of these communities of people was the Irish community. And Irish dancers, they would put wooden splats on the bottom of their shoes, and then they would, do their clogging thing. They would river dance. I'm not going to show you that because I can't do it very well, if at all. But I think slaves see that and they think, how can I embody rhythm? Or not slaves, but black folks see that and think, how can I embody rhythm even more? I grew up doing a style of dance called steppin', which is really popular for fraternities in colleges, in the historically black colleges in the States, because back then the colleges were separated, so the black ones are very special. And our fraternities have these dances or this way of moving that are very traditional. Each fraternity only does their dance. And also, if you go to a party and that fraternity starts dancing and you're not in the fraternity, you can't do their dance or they'll beat you up. It's very them. Does that make sense? It's a very strongly held tradition, a very personally held tradition. But I got trained when we were kids, we were trained by somebody who was in a fraternity back then, so that we could perform more in church. And essentially it's like you see this, it's a rhythm in the body, right? Very similar. It makes me think of ham bone, pattern juba, this thing. So that's something that I think is really, really, really important to consider. The Reconstruction era actually splays in so many different ways, because also at this time, there's this thing called buck and wing that's coming up. And as slaves are cakewalk and ring shout and all of these things, black people are reacting to their environment. You see a slave, you see a plantation owner, you want to make fun of them, so you start holding yourself a certain way, moving a certain way, but you still have your own cultural movements, but now they're blending as you're interacting with other people's cultural movements, and you guys are trying to find rhythm that keeps you together no matter what. And then you no longer have the plantations, and you're interacting with other people. Buck and wing is this other thing, and it's the early versions of what vernacular or authentic jazz would eventually come to be. And if you YouTube buck and wing, you can find a video or two. And it doesn't look like anything, it's guys, they're flicking their legs around and jumping up and down, and they're on the floor and they're moving their hands around. But this is some of the earliest iterations of jazz dancing that a lot of dance historians would agree on. And when these guys who are doing buck and wing and they have pat and juba and all these things start interacting with the other communities, they see them putting the wooden spats on the bottom of their shoes. They think, oh, maybe this is another way that I can embody rhythm. And so then we begin to see the formation of tap dancing. In the early 20th century, in Charleston, South Carolina, there's a community of people specifically of black folks that's still popular. It's the Gullah Geechee people. And I think the Gullah Geechee people have roots all over West Africa. We can identify those specifically, maybe they're, I don't want to say they're descended from, but like a group that they may be related to. In America, we say Gullah Geechee, but maybe in Guinea-Bissau, one of the tribes that the Gullah Geechee people may have come from is the Susu people. The Susu people have a dance called the Yankee. The Yankee is believed to be the African source, according to Monsell Durden, who's one of my historical mentors, to be the source of what the Charleston is. Does it make sense? And so Charleston, South Carolina, the Gullah Geechee people live there. They're doing dances that they remember from maybe their time in the Susu tribe or whatever tribe they were in West Africa. And those dances are being interpreted as like we're traveling back and forth in a line with this Legomania thing where we're kicking a lot. And now we have Charleston, right? Charleston continues to develop. Charleston and tap move on. But also black dancers are interacting with European dancers and they see, because Europeans are dancing in partnered ways. Tango, foxtrot, waltz. And black dancers didn't really have partner dancing like that. Okay, what's our own spin? What's our remix of that? The first thing actually was not blues necessarily, and it wasn't Lindy Hop. The dance before all of that was actually Texas Tommy. And not the Texas Tommy that we do that goes behind the back. It's a different sort of thing. And if you ever get a chance to take a class with Monsell Durden, I highly encourage you to do it. Because he actually can teach Texas Tommy. He studied it a ton, as it was done back then. If you Google, or if you know to YouTube Texas Tommy, you can find old videos of people in like really old clothing doing partner dancing. It's not quite Lindy Hop. It's very up. They're very upright, and they're bouncing, but it's a partner dance. Does it make sense? So it was actually black Americans kind of interacting with Europeans and then remixing what they saw that eventually leads to this idea of partner dancing that we have, that eventually becomes Lindy Hop in the 20s and so forth and so on. So the reason why I wanted to talk about that part of the history is because it's very clear that jazz dancing in general, when I say jazz, I'm using that as a catch-all right now. And when I say jazz, I'm talking about tap. I'm talking about vernacular jazz, which is, Shorty George, Fall Off the Log, or whatever. I'm talking about eccentric dancing, guys like Snake Hips Tucker and so forth and so on. I'm just using it as a catch-all for all of this. Eventually, I think if we can acknowledge that it exists in a bigger world than just the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, well, then we have to ask ourselves, what does it mean to us today? If we can't box it in time, and in fact, it actually stretches back into the past very deeply, and all of those traditions are connected, then we're left to assume or wonder, is that time still connected to us? Does it make sense? And if we think about that, then that question that I asked earlier becomes more heavy. What is the value of dance to a song? What is the value of song and dance to a slave? What is the value of song and dance to me? What was their why? What is my why? Why were they doing this? Why am I doing it? Does it make sense? This shouldn't be something that makes people feel guilty or uncomfortable. I think this is a question that can bring freedom, because I believe they were dancing for freedom. I believe they were dancing to try to shake off some of the bad things that they were experiencing. Does it make sense? And if we look at the dance and we try to connect with their context, okay, so then if I want to do this dance in a way that honors the history and honors the culture, then I have to be authentic. I have to be real because I want to find joy. I want to find something free on the other side of that. So then why would I dance? Like, what's going on in my life that I have to shake off? What's going on in my life that I want to process and maybe be free of? Does it make sense? I don't want to be a bummer, and I hope that this doesn't bum anyone out. For me, I think it's a beautiful message because the world it can be really heavy sometimes. That's the reality. I don't think we do ourselves any favors pretending that it's not. When we show up to these spaces, what I'm saying is it can be more than a fun vacation. It can be more than wearing nice clothes and seeing your friends. And I think that's fine if that's what it is. I don't think that's bad at all. But I'm saying that each of us has an opportunity maybe to connect the dance to our own hearts and our own personal experiences. If we start off honestly, if we show up on the floor, and instead of smiling because I see that's what they do in the old videos, I'm actually honest with myself. And maybe that means acknowledging, actually, I feel pretty jet lagged. And maybe I'm tired and my head hurts. I'm not there yet. I'm not at a smiley place just yet, you know? Maybe I'm stressed out. My boss has been on my head. He's treating me poorly. Or like I'm worried about finances or a loved one. I'm having problems in my personal life with a loved one or something. I don't know. Maybe I just don't feel good just because I don't feel good. But if I can start there and I'm honest, okay, well, this dance is for processing. This dance is for holding heaviness. These dances, the tradition of moving and embodying rhythm in community was done so the slaves could hold on to their dignity and their humanity. They could find a way to push through. So what can I use it for? How can it aid me? Does it make sense? And I think that question is open. That question is open for everyone, and the why, not just the how, but our why. And that's why I find history compelling at all. It's not just so that we know facts, because we know facts. I think history is important to share because it teaches us lessons about why it is that we're doing what we're doing in the first place. And for me, when I'm dancing, I'm trying to be free. I live in a world that tells me that I'm not muscular enough, I'm not tall enough, I don't make enough money, you know. I live in a world currently in my country, like, Trump's tripping. And I feel like there's so many reasons to be stressed and angry and to feel bad. The cost of food is just going up. They make it hard. They encourage this idea of individualism, which makes it so that you're not supposed to care about other people. So when you live in an environment where you have to work hard so that you can just eat, everybody else becomes an obstacle to you trying to survive. And so it really disconnects you, which I think actually makes you feel sad and limp and heavy. So when I show up to dance, I'm showing up here because I need this shit, man. Like, if I don't have this shit, I don't know what I would do. I gotta shake something. I gotta get this out. I have to process it. And when you see me smile, if I'm smiling when I'm dancing, it's because I moved through that, and the dance brought me to another place. And I think this is how you honor the cultural roots of the dance, by showing up and being honest, and then letting the dance move you from point A, which is your reality, honoring your center, to point B, which can be joy. Yeah? The dance is a journey, the destination is your joy. So yeah, that's a quick little just journey through history, starting maybe in the plantation era, moving on. We have that, what she said. She said there was the Negro spiritual and the ring shout. The Negro spiritual, it's interesting because those are songs that I know, like I grew up doing. And ring shout is interesting because we still shout in churches, and I grew up doing that. I know now what to call it, but when I was younger, we just did it. Does it make sense? And so hundreds of years later, let's say people really started dancing and moving in this way in 1619. In 2005, in 2006, in 2003, like, black people were still doing that. I know because I was there. I was doing that with my folks. So for hundreds of years, it's been giving freedom. It was giving freedom then, and it's reaching forward till today, you know? I feel like tap dancing, the inception of it, over 100 years old, almost 150 years old. Okay, it started to give freedom then. People are still doing it now. Lindy Hop, about 100 years ago. And this is a context where black Americans now, after the Great Migration, people are fleeing the South. Jim Crow laws and aggression in the South, and when I say aggression, I mean some white folks are just showing up and murdering black people for it's interesting, after slavery was abolished, Black people were running for office, for positions of power in government. Black people owned businesses, they owned banks and all kinds of stuff. We weren't necessarily second class right off the rip. They just kept killing the successful people. They would just show up and kill them. And so a lot of folks fled the South and they went up to the North. And one of the places that people ended up in was Harlem. Okay, and now they're not being killed, but the racism in the North is different. It's segregation. You have your own little space, but you don't interact with the white people. But you know, you can be where you are. That is the context that Lindy Hop and whatever is born into. And so when people are showing up to the Savoy Ballroom and they're dressing up to the nines and whatever, I wonder what they were trying to shake off. And these people are often working in service positions for white people, right? The women are working often as maids and as cleaners. The men are working often in factories or also as drivers, as chauffeurs. When you live in a world still, you're not in a Jim Crow environment where you're maybe in the danger of dying, but you are in a position where you're still being reminded that you're not you're not on the same level as these other people. And you have this tradition, however many nights a week where you can show up, you can put on your best clothes, you know, and you can go and you can dance. And maybe for one night or for however many nights you do feel like royalty. And I think there was a way of processing pain back then, and that's what Lindy Hop also was. I think it was sex, I think it was drugs, but I also think people showed up and they were like, I want to be free. This is some bullshit, man. Chance the Rapper just released an album. He's one of my favorite musicians, and he has this line in this song called Tree, where, where he says, I know this, it's just so cultural. He says, I think my mama had a job at the saltine factor. Why? She came home crying and said, I'm tired of these crackers. Like, is this idea of I'm tired of being held down. Like, I have to pretend and smile even though I'm constantly being disrespected. But in my own personal space, I have my own ways of processing. In that song, he was talking about smoking weed and like dancing with his mom. And that was the way that she processed being disrespected outside of the home. But all of this is to say, again, I don't want us to focus on like, oh, I feel so sad that these bad things are happening, because when you get to a place where you just feel guilty or you feel ashamed, you're useless. That's useless. I don't care, and I have no interest in white people feeling guilty. I have zero interest in that. I don't have zero interest in white people feeling ashamed, because why? That does nothing. Guilt and shame just sit, and when it goes, it's replaced with resentment. What I want is a better world. And so I don't want people to feel bad when we talk about this stuff, but hear that the dance and the music are ways to process. And then if you want to help me make a better world, I think one of the best ways that people in this room could do that is by, when you show up in the space, just like, am I honoring the cultural impulse that started this whole tradition that I'm playing a part of? And that cultural impulse is that I want to be free, which means I need to be honest with myself, and I have to hold my center to be true. And then when I show up tonight, maybe on the dance floor, when I'm dancing with someone, I'm remembering I'm dancing for more than just trying to impress my follow with this cool move that I learned in class, or I'm dancing more than to try to like flirt with that person on the other side of the room, or more than just the joy of being in a cool city that I've never been in a nice venue, listening to cool music, wearing nice clothes. I can also be dancing to shake off some of those negative things that I'm experiencing in my personal life. And there's a moment when I'm holding my partner's hand, similar to that ring shot. We're in rhythm. The pulse keeps us in rhythm together. And this person can maybe hold me in a way that's intimate, in a way that can move my spirit from a place of wherever it is to a place of joy. And maybe I can hold somebody else and do that work for them too. Does that make sense? It doesn't have to be like super deep or crazy. I think you start off with honesty and then you do the dance. And I think our human instinct kind of takes over and does the rest. Does that make sense? To back that up, if we can just take a quick little history tour after the swing era, right? Swing eventually turns into bebop in the 40s. Tap dancers and drummers and musicians get more interested in this idea of syncopation, right? So if I clap twice or snap twice, right, those two beats have equal emphasis. When I syncopate something, I'm gonna compress or I'm gonna stretch those two beats. So if I went, instead of, I compressed one, I stretched the other. Do you understand? And syncopation doesn't only have to be such a simple compression and stretching. Syncopation can be, like if I'm just gonna like short fire a whole bunch. So now this is what I mean when I say syncopation, they become very interested in very complicated rhythms. So maybe instead of playing, I don't know, dum, ba 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 bum ba. They start playing stuff like da 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 da, or like rhythmically way more complex than, I don't know. Da bum 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 bum. So when I say syncopation, that's what I mean. They're trying to fit a bunch in there. The tap dancers also start doing that. John Bubbles and so forth and so on start doing that. And so we move from maybe a Bill Bojangles Robin idea of tap dancing, which is, very, to a John Bubbles idea of tap dancing, which may be more like, you know what I mean? And the musicians also follow that. For those of us who aren't like, as practiced or as rigorous as a John Bubbles in tap dancing, or as a Charlie Parker, how do we meet that music? The rhythm comes up out of the feet and into the body. And this is where a lot of actually, as swing is turning over into bebop, that's where a lot of the vernacular jazz steps were the most popular and the most like spread out. Fall Off the Log, Shorty George, Susie Q was in this era. The rhythm is coming up out of the feet and we're embodying it. Does it make sense? And then in the 50s, right, I can show you guys an interview. If you Google James Brown, I don't know, YouTube James Brown interviews. I can't remember the exact one off the top of my head, but there is an interview on YouTube where James Brown says, I always considered myself a jazz man. I just combined what they did in church and what they did in the juke. I put it together and I called it soul. But I always thought I was like those guys. So James Brown is the godfather of soul, right? In the late 50s, that's his whole thing. He's inspired by Little Richard, Mama Sister, no. My brain is really flipping with the names right now. Rosetta Thorpe, Mama Thornton. He's inspired by these great rock musicians or whatever. He's inspired by what's going on in the juke and what's happening in church. He says, I'm a jazz man. So then we see soul, the innovator of soul says, I am connected. I feel like I was always connected to jazz, right? This is moving out of the 40s into the 50s, okay? And then if you go to the 80s or the 90s, what is a Tribe Called Quest saying? They're saying, we got the jazz, or we got the jazz, or we got the jazz. You move forward 15 or 20 years. When I was coming up, you have Kendrick Lamar. He drops To Pimp a Butterfly, which is a rap album that has a ton of jazz fusion on it. But even before that, if you listen to the rhythm of how he raps in a track like Rigor Mortis, it swings, Got me breathing with dragons. I cracked that egg in your basket, I'm Marilyn Manson with magic. Now just imagine the magic I like to ask is, don't ask for your favorite rapper, he dead, I rapped him and made him cast. He's syncopating. Like you could imagine somebody tap dancing that same rhythm that I'm singing, The sun is under my feet and I come in peace to compete. I don't run if you rather leave my statistic go up in weeks and I go visit on many MC, that kind of thing. I say to say that this tradition of swing, of embodying and holding rhythm and that being a source to freedom, that is consistent in Black culture even as the music landscape changes, which is one of the reasons why I feel so inspired to try to bring jazz movement and bring our understanding of jazz dance also into the present day. Not that we need to run away from swing, but also that maybe we can be more in conversation with other styles. We can move closer and get to know other ways of dancing and other ways of moving, because they all started where we start. And those people were literally coming, the innovators of those styles came from our community. Charlie Atkins was a great tap dancer and vaudeville performer who eventually went on Motown Records, and he was there Head choreographer. So the head choreographer for the Temptations, Charlie Atkins choreographed for them. Gladys Knight and the Pips, Charlie Atkins choreographed for him. Al Green and Marvin Gaye, if they danced, Charlie Atkins choreographed for it. He also choreographed for the Jackson 5. Sammy Davis Jr., Michael Jackson learned from jazz dancers first. Michael Jackson could tap dance. Does it make sense? In Detroit JIT, those dancers were inspired by tap dancers. Does that make sense? Yeah? A lot of hip-hop dancers and house heads, even in the 90s, looked at jazz dancing. They were inspired by that. We listened to the formation of electronic music. Guys like Herbie Hancock and Miles Davis were the first ones to innovate that technology, the Moog synthesizer. Jazz musicians pushed the electronic sound forward. And so all of these iterations of black culture that we see that are more present in the last 50, 60, 70 years are deeply touched by jazz. It's not theoretical. Like our musicians, our dancers, our masters innovated, got in those communities, and helped those styles push off. So why then would we not live more in conversation? And really what this does is it paints for me, when I think about jazz, instead of it being something that sits in a box, I get really excited. It's like I'm looking at the night sky. It's like I'm looking at a bright constellation. I'm looking at something that reaches hundreds of years back. And then it reaches forward almost 100 years into my context. And to each person in those centuries that's asking the same question, which is like, who are you? What will you bring? What will you give? And what it wants you to give is honesty in yourself. And what it gives in return is joy and freedom. Does it make sense? When we break away from this idea that solely puts jazz in that box, I think the benefit of it is that we can honor our own humanity a little bit more. It isn't to say that we throw it all away and we start, top rocking or we start popping and we call it jazz. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that if we live in a world where we understand that the borders are not so strong, the borders maybe aren't there. Those guys are my cousins. The lockers, those are my cousins, right? The house dancers, those are my cousins. Like, we're very related. If I went over there, I maybe could have a conversation with you because what you're doing isn't exactly what I'm doing, but it's close because you were heavily influenced by us. Does that make sense? Now, instead of us playing pretend and there's a right way to do it, we can live in a world where there's more freedom, things are more flexible, and we live in a world where the self, we have to start here if we want to figure out. If everything is so open, you have to start here. And then you learn from the masters, and you learn how they did it, and then you learn why they did it, and then you think for yourself, why am I moving? And then your how becomes your own question to figure out. It doesn't have to be exactly like them. It can be if you want it to be, but it's because you chose it, not because it has to be that way. Does that make sense? So I just wanted to talk to that bit about black history, the black culture of the dance. When people ask a lot, like, how can we honor the black roots and stuff, I think the answer is actually, it's really, really, really simple. It's just to try to be more human. When you show up on the dance floor, you try to look at the people around you and understand that, like, I have an opportunity to really hold you. Maybe we can all get somewhere better than where we are now. Does that make sense? That's what my people have been doing for hundreds of years. So yeah. That's what I planned. That's what I wanted to say and share. I don't know if people have more specific questions, but like that is what I wanted to say. Now I guess we can do a Q&A. Does anybody have any questions or ideas, anything specific? It doesn't have to be related to what I talked about either. I'm kind of just here as a resource. The organizers kind of pitched this idea that people in Turkey were really curious to know more about the experiences of black people, and because it's a context that's not really super represented in Turkey. So yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can talk about my experience as a black person. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, my experience has been very interesting. The first time I was put in handcuffs, I was 9 years old. I was trying to get in my grandmother's house. I knew that she left her back door unlocked. We just needed to go in and get something before we went to church. But my grandmother turned her alarm on, and her alarm, and at that time, her alarm would like call the cops. The cops would come if you set it off. And so I opened up her back door. The alarm went off. Oh, I realized that I triggered the alarm, so I closed it. I went outside. I told my mom that I set off the alarm, and she said, okay, we'll just wait here and explain it, and then we'll call Nina, my grandmother, and then she'll let us in. And when the cop came, even though my mom was saying that this is her mother's home and I was the grandson, he still put me in handcuffs until and even though we were just waiting there, like casually, we didn't even take anything. He still put me in handcuffs and waited for my grandmother to come to like vindicate me. So that was a situation that I went through, but like I think interacting with the cops and stuff, there are things that are removed from my travels as a jazz dancer. To be honest, a lot of the racism that I've experienced jazz dancing has been in Europe. Like 2 years ago in Italy, I was followed around by a mob of young men, and I was on the beach, and a bunch of people were dancing and like pointing at me, and my partner at the time, who was also a black woman, and they're calling us like negri. And then men were following her, and like one guy got in her face and like pushed her, and said a bunch of stuff in Italian. I've had experiences in Paris where I've tried to like order things before, and like people just look at me and point out the door, and they don't feed me. I've had experiences where like I get followed around in Paris, like my luggage gets lost and I gotta go to, I don't know, a weekday or something to find new clothes, and I'm being followed around the whole time by a security guard. Everybody else is fine, but I'm being followed around. I've had those kinds of experiences. So that stuff happens. I mean, when I'm traveling, that stuff happens. And to be truthful, every time that I go to a place, especially because I'm aware that everywhere things are becoming a little bit more conservative, everywhere things seem to be leaning more right, I am a little bit like nervous to be interpreted or processed as like a foreigner, and to run into that. I'm aware that like there's 80% of people are probably going to be fine and leave me alone, even if they don't like me. But like running into like the one person, like that one person that might do something crazy is always on my mind. And so yeah, I think there is a part of me that is always on, or wondering if I'm gonna be perceived like weird or wrong. I accidentally left my bag here on the airplane as I was off of one of my flights. I left one of my carry-ons, this one actually, on the airplane because I was tired and I just blinked. And I got on the bus, and then I realized I didn't have it, but I had to go through the lost and found to get it. It was this big hullabaloo. And I remember as I was trying to ask for help, I went up to this help desk, and I watched this guy look at the other person. He was smiling and talking to them, and then when I walked up, he didn't even look me in the eyes. And he just handed me a piece of paper and tried to push me away. And I'm not gonna presume that that was about my race, but like immediately when things like that happen, if I see you looking at a white person and smiling and talking, and then you get to me and the actions change, that is where my brain goes first. I don't know I can't say that it was because I was black, and I'm not trying to say that. But immediately, I do know that my brain went, fuck, and I changed everything about how I was standing, about how my hair was like this, so I walked away, and then I put it up in a bun, because I feel like I look less like a stereotype when I'm that way. Like I look more, I look softer. It'll be easier to meet me with softness than when I'm like this. You know, this looks maybe more like the image of a thug or something like that because of racism. So I went and I changed all of that, and then even though I was frustrated, I deliberately talked to him like this, very slowly. I raised my eyebrows so that he knows that I don't want any problems, and over time he slowly softened. These are the things that I'm always doing to shift, to try to like, you know, interact with the world. I don't think that that's special. Like, I think that all like women also, there are little ways that women shift to be more comfortable or to be more effective around men there are little ways that queer people shift to be more comfortable around straight people. Like, it's just when you're in it, when you're from a group that's marginalized, it's important for us to be sensitive and empathetic because we're not really aware of all the ways that somebody may be trying to contort themselves to fit in. Does that make sense? And my experience with being black is sort of that. Outside of these like overt examples of being followed by groups of men or like, you know, people pointing at me and calling me slurs or being followed by cops or whatever have you. I mean, I could talk to you guys about how in the States, you know, you get pepper sprayed or cops hold you at gunpoint. You're not even doing anything. But I mean, that's redundant. I think you guys can see a lot of that stuff if you look at the news. I'm not exempt from those things. And I think just because I travel and I occupy a space that seems luxurious, and in a lot of ways it is, right? I got invited here. I'm in a nice hotel. We're getting shuttled everywhere. I'm still a person. I still live paycheck to paycheck. Like, you guys' economic realities, if you have like a real job, may be way better than mine. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just a guy. Like, I'm not special. I'm not different than anyone else. I just do a very specific kind of work. I like to teach people how to wiggle, and I like to wiggle for fun, you know, to music. And I don't view myself as better or different. And so when you see things that happen to other people, like, I'm not necessarily free from that either. Does that make sense? That is also my experience. I'm just a person. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but there's some excerpts of my experiences. I think we're actually close to being out of time. Does anybody else have another question? I want to wrap this up on a good note because it's a lot of heavy conversation. The heaviness is a part of life. Like, it doesn't have to be something that we sit on. Guilt, shame, sadness, if you just stop there, it sits and you're stuck. The point of all of this is to be honest that that's the reality. And if we can be honest that that's the reality, then when we show up to dance, the dancing can do something very real for us. The music can do something very real for us. And when we show up to dance with each other, understand that there's a vital role that we can play for each other that can be deeper than just, ooh, I just learned how to follow this really cool move, or I just learned how to lead this really interesting thing. I want to try it. We can dance and it can be like, man, I feel so stressed out, or I feel so sad, or I feel so bummed out. But I'm going to try to share some joy with somebody. And in the process of dancing, you can be something that like shifts somebody's energy from being anxious or sad to being joyful and free. Does that make sense? So the point isn't to focus on the things that are hard or that are sad. The point is that the dance is the way to get out of it. And for me. And that's what I wanted to share. Thanks, guys.